Welcome, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. For those of you who I don't know, I'm Peter Angelos. I'm the director of the MacLean Center. It's really a pleasure for me to welcome you here and to introduce our speaker today. Before I do that, I want to remind you that the theme for this year's lectures is advocacy in healthcare and medicine. And next week, we'll hear from Dr. Javi Moraim from University of Tennessee Health Science Center. So I encourage you to mark your calendar, a week from today, come back. Today, it's a pleasure to introduce Dr. William Sage. Dr. Sage has both an MD and a JD. He's a tenured professor at Texas A&M's Medical and Law Schools, professor by courtesy at the Bush School of Government and Public Service, and founding faculty director of the university's Institute for Healthcare Access in Fort Worth, Texas. From 2006 to 2022, he held professorships in law and medicine at UT Austin, where he also served as vice provost for health affairs. He was previously tenured professor at Columbia Law School, has been a visiting professor at Yale, Harvard, and NYU. These are institutions on the East Coast. Some of you may have heard of them. Dr. Sage is an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine, where he recently served on the Board of Healthcare Services and the Committee on the Future of Nursing 2020 to 2030. He's also an elected member of the American Law Institute. I could go on for a long time, but he asked me not to, so he would have enough time to talk. But he's written over 200 articles, has authored or edited 4 books, including the Oxford Handbook of U.S. Health Law. So pleasure to welcome Bill Sage.
Well, thank you, Peter. I'm very happy to be here. Just having a medical and law degree, qualifies you to be part of a series on advocacy, I guess, in the Center for Medical Ethics. But the MacLean Center has been a wonderful presence in this field for decades, and I'm privileged to be part of that history now. I look at the slides here, and I realize my fonts, what we used to call typefaces, seem a little retro projected. So think of this as the vintage shop equivalent of an ethics lecture. Also, one of you has to promise, if you're here when Javi Moraim comes next week, just out of the blue, ask her a loud question that has to do with very fast cars and auto racing, because she'll be very surprised that you know that. I have ridden with her, strapped into her sort of racing version of one of her old cars, and it is a good experience. This is sort of a time when I am thinking very seriously, as we all are, about the future of the profession, the future of healthcare, the future of the country, and the future of the world. There are some things I'm not going to be able to address in one lecture, but what you are, I'm afraid, stuck with me today is a lot of different ideas that do sort of follow an arc. And so I will end up jumping around more than a focused presentation probably should do, but I'm going to try to do 3 things. I'm going to try to talk in sort of broad health policy terms about some of the things that I see on the horizon. I'm going to talk very bluntly about medical professionalism. We could call it, healthcare professionalism, but I will be blunt right now and say 2 things. Is that as much as I value and work to advance nursing and other health professions, physicians hold the power in the system, and the first obligation is on physicians. And the second thing that I will say is that the U.S. healthcare system will not change unless physicians give it ethical permission to change. And kind of have to understand that in order to engage any of the issues that in this type of an audience you might choose to engage. So let's be blunt. I also tend to start with one arithmetic question. How many zeros in 1 trillion? 12, good. 12 zeros. 12 zeros in 1 trillion. And the US healthcare system turns through $5 trillion every year. That is a 5 with 12 zeros after it. It is an unfathomable amount of money. I will go to kind of a first slide that says some of the things I'm saying to you, but you don't need exactly to worry about the words on the slide. One of the things I've come to realize, and I've spent my entire policy career, my formative fire hose experience early in my career with the MDJD was working in the Clinton White House on healthcare reform that failed in 1993. And ever since then, I've had the privilege of being largely an academic, working on multiple issues over the course of my career, but always kind of keeping the big picture in mind, even as the focus has changed. When I give talks outside of the United States, one of the things one realizes is that American English particularly is highly economical when saying big numbers. And if you're ever being translated from English to other languages, you have to really, really, really slow down for the numbers. And in the course of giving some of these talks, it occurred to me that health policy in particular and public policy in general in this country would likely be significantly different if in the English language the words for million, billion, and trillion did not rhyme. I mean, honestly, if you had to say zebra per billion and, faucet per trillion, and people would hear the difference and we forget it. So when you're talking about, $5 trillion a year, nearly a fifth of the US economy, you really have to understand that it's those financial flows that dominate the system, which also kind of leads to something that I think I've come to now when I look back on 30 years of a policy career and think of all the things that I expected to happen because they were logically necessary and they haven't happened. Right. It has occurred to me that money should be liberating, but for US healthcare, it's been paralyzing. We should be able to do more because we are wealthy and can afford it, and will devote resources to it. And in some very basic aspects of being a healthy society and all the things that would go into that, including, not limited to medical care, we actually have gotten paralyzed by the amount of money spent. And I think, there is an interesting counterfactual where Medicare did not come in 1965 when the terms came in, where healthcare spending stayed at roughly the level that other countries devote to it. And I mean, more specific, medical spending stays at the levels other countries devote to it, which gives us actually significant better outcomes and a better society than we have. And that is sobering. But, it is an interesting moment in history and in my own career to kind of look back on these years and see what we haven't done and to try to limit it a lot. So let me wrap the introductory remarks up with one other thing. I have been teaching and researching a lot over the course of my career about competition in the US healthcare system, about market functioning. And, what it's worth though seems even an odd thing to announce now, much odder than it even was 10 years ago, even in Texas. If you want to know kind of my general mindset is I tend to think of myself as a liberal Democrat who loves markets. I really do. Markets work. I think they're great. And I really support them. I was asked in a talk that was not fundamentally about health and economics, why is it that competition doesn't seem to work very well in US healthcare? And I had to give a very concise answer. And I just thought for a moment, I said, well, it's two basic problems. You can't have a market unless you have real prices and real buyers. And US healthcare does not have real prices, meaning we do not price things at the lowest cost of producing those things. And that filters through a giant system. And we do not have, I hope this is not someone faking being engaged in order. It's a real emergency, all right. I will accept that. The other problem is we don't have real buyers. We don't really have anyone who is buying for their own account. And when you put the two together, you get $5 trillion of largely artificial commerce. And that is not something I say with pride or with triumph. I think that's tragic, and it bothers me that I say it. But I have talked a lot about medical pricing over the course of my career. So if it's okay, it's not necessarily a legal partnership.
No.
It's the things that I feel like I really want to share with you all in this type of talk. I have taught about medical pricing now for over 10 years by using two hospital bills. And I'm going to show you the two hospital bills. And there were some really good lessons you can learn about the economics of U.S. healthcare from these two bills, which are on a slide, and you're welcome to have the slide. And that's not what I'm going to focus on. I taught this for 10 years. And it was only a year ago that I looked at it with fresh eyes and thought, you know, there's another real lesson here. And this often happens to me where I have an example, a subject, and from talking to students or just thinking about it myself, suddenly something that really should have been obvious before is, but wasn't, now is obvious. And what I kind of realize is if one goes to a hospital these days with a serious medical problem, fundamentally what one is paying for are the people. You're really paying for skilled, dedicated professionals in the right places at the right time who are going to care for you and provide what you need. And now let me show you these two hospital bills, which have lots of lessons to them. This is a bill from 1934 from Mercy Hospital in San Diego, California, which is where I did my internship here. Peter, I actually spent 15 years of my life as a law student, a medical student, a medical intern, and a young lawyer, all in California, which is on the other coast from the institutions you so kindly pointed out. This was Mercy Hospital. A friend there, after I left the internship, was going through a patient chart, found this and knew I would like it. So this is a surgical hospitalization in the year 1934 for Mrs. Ann Moldenauer. There was no HIPAA at the time, with all due respect to Mrs. Moldenauer. I appreciate having the bill to show. It looks like a bill from almost any other business, and for 10 days of hospitalization, the total bill was $62.71, which is, as the next slide will show, but we won't go into it, over $1,000 in inflation adjusted funding, but still $1,000. And says weekly payments in advance will be appreciated, which is why she has a credit on this bill of $58 and only $4 owing. Anyway, it looks like any other hospital bill. This is a hospital bill from April of 2015, which was in full force. Sorry, at the time of 2015, of course, HIPAA was in full force. Why can I show you this hospital bill? Because this is my hospital bill. This was the first of two hip replacements I had that year. And yes, my hip replacements are far greater and far more important to my life than probably whatever surgery Mrs. Moldenauer had in 1934. This is from Seton Hospital now, Seton Ascension, in the middle of Austin, Texas. There you could click through on any of these categories and see the detail, and you'll see though at the end of the day, in the bottom of the first column, for a one-night hospitalization, $111,000, of which Blue Cross paid $41,000, and Medicare would, for an older, sicker patient than I was at the time, it paid about $20,000 for comparison. So there's lots of lessons there on the next slide. You can read them, but here's the epiphany. The epiphany is that the people that I'm really paying for are invisible on the top. The doctors are invisible. The nurses are invisible. They're invisible for completely separate reasons. The physicians are invisible because even if they're all employees of a hospital, which these days majority of physicians actually are, for the first time in history, they bill separately. They bill as professional fees, not facility fees. So all the physicians are invisible. The nurses are invisible for the opposite reason. They are not allowed to bill at all. And the nurses are regarded on this hospital bill, and these are incredibly skilled health professionals. You could not have a successful hospitalization without the skill and dedication of your nursing workforce, and there are many studies to demonstrate that. They are represented in this bill as furniture. They are undifferentiated overhead that is subsumed in the bed rate for hospitalization. So what are we paying for? People. What do we see in what we pay? Not people. That's something really to think about in the healthcare system. I was teaching at NYU when COVID happened. I was teaching mainly at the law school, but I also had a visiting professorship in the medical school, and I was working with various people in healthcare settings in New York when COVID hit, and I continued to collaborate with a couple of those since. It probably happened here. I imagine it happened here in this medical center, but all the major hospitals that were very hard hit in the early days of COVID, all over the news, there were, stories about a shortage of hospital beds and how that was, causing people to be sick and in many instances to die unnecessarily. And you know what happened? Because it probably also happened here, lots of well-intentioned people called the hospital and said, I have a bed in my attic that I'm not using, and you have a shortage of hospital beds, and I would be happy to donate it. Sounds possible, it's not a possible story. This happened. What's the problem? When we talk about a hospital bed, we are not talking about a piece of furniture. We're talking about a fully staffed, equipped way to care for a patient with a serious medical need. And that doesn't get communicated, and it does not get captured in how this $5 trillion a year gets spent. And so, I think one of the big lessons for professional advocacy, there's the slide that, the nurses are invisible. One of the big lessons for advocacy is that we claim to be in professions that care about people. We represent those people as money, and we get it wrong all the time. And that is something that I think all of us have a role in trying to fix. I do a lot of work in ethics, and I do a lot of work in the ethics of the profession. I am obviously not speaking for physicians, nor am I speaking for lawyers. I do have the background experience and training and the licenses on the wall to reflect both professions. When I work in professional ethics, I am always distressed, not clinical ethics as many of you would do it, but sort of professional ethics. I am always distressed by the hindsight. I am always distressed by the misplaced nostalgia. I'm always, distressed by the fact that we want to fight the last war. And we're seeing a whole lot of that in the backsliding post-pandemic in various aspects of health policy. And as part of my conversations with your faculty today, even in, it turns out, clinical practice post-pandemic, that backslides in ways that have forgotten the lessons. When I think about professional ethics as I would like to see it incorporated, I think about it as forward-looking, not backward-looking, and that is actually how I personally define leadership. In professional context, I think of leadership as forward-looking ethics. And that's always what I'm kind of hoping that audiences will find something to latch onto. There is a little bit of irony here that I have always recognized. I have found myself an accidental advocate for generational change, for the recognition of multi-generational workplaces in medicine on both sides of the treatment relationship, appreciating that, yeah, caring is multi-generational and receiving care is multi-generational. I also do all of these kind of talks and teaching, and I love to teach where, you know, I'm up here old and you're out there young, and part of what I'm telling you is don't listen to people like me. And it's something also you all have to kind of remember, because in professions who particularly sort of environment of experience and the receipt of knowledge from people who are our elders and more experienced, and there are very strong generational hierarchies within professions, and it's not that one should reject them all, but one should at least think about them before accepting them. We had some also conversations this morning with your faculty where sort of thinking about when we were in training, what were we taught to do? And, you know, realizing that some very basic things that you would assume we were taught to do, we actually weren't taught to do, and now we're telling you to do it. So again, you know, we apologize, and, you know, we'll do the best to support you, but understand that this is an interesting thing in all of these professional contexts, is the generational hierarchies, the deference, you know, there's value to it, but you have to also understand when you want to think in your own generation forward looking, and not just in our generation backward looking. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I was gratified to see that Steve Brint, who teaches out in UC Riverside or UC Irvine, I can't remember now, whose sociology of professions work I have long admired, was quoted in the New York Times this morning in one of the columns about, you know, the coming storm for universities and elite education. And he has always made a distinction between expert knowledge professions and social trustee professions. And I think that's something that I have kept in mind over the years in my work. In American society, medicine has both an expert knowledge role and a social trustee role, and those things are also, I think, very important, as is these days the central nature and importance of information in our society, which is not news coming from me. You live with this every day. But, you know, the notion of shared trustworthy information seems, at least for now, to be quaint. And that's dangerous in so many aspects of our society. And so when we think about the professional role, understand that information and trust is central to both the expertise and to the trusteeship implicit in the profession. And then, you know, with apologies for the bottom of the slide being a little bit cut off. Here's an unfamous quote from a valued teacher of mine at Stanford Law School and later a colleague of mine at Columbia Law School. He was actually the person who, when I first called at Stanford from the medical school and said, I'd like to be admitted to the law school, also said no. And I, you know, reminded him of that years later when we were colleagues at Columbia. But he's known, Ron Gilson is known as an expert in corporate law and laws of innovation and Silicon Valley, actually. And he wrote an article where he asked what I think is a profound question, which is, can there be professionalism without market power, meaning without sort of the economic privilege, the monopoly, the designation, the you know, exclusivity that leading professions, especially medicine, have in the United States. And I actually do believe that medical professionalism is more than an empty vessel. And I do believe there are things that some insulation from the marketplace is critical to maintain in terms of collaboration, in terms of dedication to best practice, the ability to say no to the customer when no is the right answer. And in terms these days of speaking truth to power, which isn't highly represented in my slide set here, but is foremost on my mind. You know, part of the expertise and the social trusteeship in ours as a medical profession and in other leading professions is that we need to have the moral courage to speak truth to power, and the power we're speaking truth to is now diverse and very powerful. I mean, we are speaking truth to government in ways we probably never expected we would have to. We are speaking truth to industry in ways that we have recognized now for those decades as the $5 trillion the year has built up, but are a little different in terms of monetizing something that we have allowed to be monetized, I think, excessively. And remember, this is coming from someone who admires marketplace. I'm not speaking to you as if I reject marketplaces. I love functioning markets, but we do not have one. And instead, we still count the dollars and turn patients into billing constructs rather than people or even scientific problems. And we have to speak through to, I don't know a better way to say it, to really, you know, this is more provocative than I want to be, but we have to know how to speak truth to the power of the mob, because social media and it's so easy to have angry messages and incorrect messages amplified today. And part of, I think, the responsibility that comes with professionalism and market power in medicine is a responsibility to figure out how to be trustworthy and, you know, have a loud voice in an environment that allows voices tend not to be the voices of calm, the voices of optimism, or the voices of science. And that's a real challenge. So I think speaking truth to power is an important thing to think about these days. I warned you that, you know, isn't as cheerful as I would typically like to be, but I do think that the end of this does really have to do with valuing the privilege that we have, including the economic privilege we have, and making sure that we do less of the bad stuff with that privilege and more of the good stuff. And, you know, their opinions will differ as to what's bad and good, but there are things that the polls that I'm sure that 95% of us agree on. All right. I was asked to do a presentation at a National Academy of Medicine meeting on the social contract of medicine, and that's sort of what these slides are drawn from. And I sort of say, well, what are the things that, you know, in my experience, and there's no proof of this, this is not an empirical study of what we do or even a historical review, but in my experience, what is medical professionalism, you know, obviously considered a central point. Yes, the patient's well-being, understanding that a patient is itself an artificial term for a person with needs, but it's usually as the physician sees that patient's needs. Medical science, authority based on experience, ethical independence. Lawyers are very good with written rules, and lawyers actually think of themselves as, you know, governed by those rules, understanding that they could actually not only interpret but manipulate those rules. I mean, that's part of what lawyers are trained to do, but we always think of the rules. My experience with doctors is we are much more role governed. We kind of embrace the role as we understand it to be and make most of our decisions in context apart from any particular rules that are involved. One thing that I found a big generational change that is now, I think, narrowed because of the ubiquity of resources that started with UpToDate, and who knows what they are now for sort of political brains in your pocket. But when I was in medical training, and I'm sure, Peter, you have the same thing, we were taught to guess. Ignorance was weakness, and we were taught to guess. Lawyers never guess. Lawyers look at it because it might have changed. And you always want to make sure that what you are doing is what the rule is. And now hopefully everybody will kind of look it up, but that was always one of the differences. Also, legal ethics, professional ethics, the rules that you're supposed to follow are just that, rules. And I actually, in my law practice, I was a corporate lawyer, not a litigator, for about 5 years after I'd done medical school, law school, internship, and part of an anesthesiology residency. I found myself practicing law with medical ethics. And that wasn't a good thing to do, but it was kind of all I understood. And you know, without going into long anecdotes, the point was that I would take situations and reach a reasonable, intelligent, compromise position that moved things along in a productive direction and served everyone's interest. Very much the way that doctors think of a day at the office, not the way that lawyers with clients with obligations to advocate their client's position are supposed to think about their work. And I got myself in mild trouble a couple of times practicing law with medical ethics, but there are differences here that sometimes having the professional comparison helps illuminate. And I do think it is kind of interesting, because this is, as many of you know, the Physicians' Pledge from the Declaration in Geneva, which is 1948, but multiply updated most recently, a little less than 10 years ago. The underlining of the things that changed in 2017. So what changed in 2017? Much more commitment to the patient's perspective, desire, opinion, experience. A notion of good medical practice. This came up in some conversations this morning. Want to think of this as evidence-based medicine, fine, but the notion that it's not just your good conscience as a medical professional, it's actually that the things you're doing are the things that are known to be the best things to do. It took till 2017 to get into the World Medical Association's version of medical ethics. Some appreciation of bidirectional generational exchange. Not, I will give my teachers alone respect, but I will give teachers, colleagues, and students respect. You know, of course, much is honored in the breach. We understand this, but it's interesting to see this happen in 2017. And then the notion that no, we are not all superhuman and we have to attend to our own well-being. Notice this is pre-pandemic that this statement was made. And the pandemic has only accentuated this, not just within health professions, but across society. That's all new. You know, that was new in 2017. You know, what do we screw up? I'm just blunt here. It's a long list. I'm not going to go through all of them. Which do I want to sort of, well, I think one is we do tend to conflate the profession's self-interest with the patient's interest, and we do that all the time. And we need to be more thoughtful about it. I do think it's important to understand that we do so much in the monetary terms. I mean, I had a couple of interesting conversations again with your faculty this morning where this came up. When I teach about the information environment of healthcare, so for convenience, think about it as the EHR. I kind of say the following, which anyone who has experience in this area, I've never heard anyone disagree with, which is in American healthcare, we collect the information we need to collect in order to get paid. Very good full stop. Everything is oriented to that. You may or may not know this, but the CPT codes, the compendium of procedural terminology that is used for coding every intervention for a diagnosed patient in pretty much every healthcare setting in the United States. It's copyrighted. Who owns the copyright? AMA owns the copyright on CPT codes. I am told that the American Medical Association, I am told, makes roughly $400 million a year in royalties off CPT copyright. All right. This is not vilifying any particular organization. It's understanding how baked into the system the payment models are and how much payment models drive information. If you want to have an information base that is not payment driven, you have to make the effort to do that. And there is very little opportunity for it. What else? I do a lot of work on transparency, on medical error, on what we sometimes call communication and resolution, or communication and reconciliation, apology, and all of that. We can talk about that. I do a lot of work in informed consent. We can talk about that. We really do not, as a profession, recognize our stewardship obligations, not just because $5 trillion is a whole lot of money. And by the way, more than half of the money we spend ostensibly on a private healthcare system in this country is public money. It originates from taxpayers or government borrowing, and it is fundamentally spent on public purposes. The public's health and medical care, it is almost all filtered through private organizations, which means that in a very meaningful sense, the US healthcare system is the largest, though entirely lawful, system of money laundering we have in this country. We take public dollars for public purposes, and we launder them through private organizations for a lot of reasons, structural, political, economic, professional. It's the way the system has grown up. We spend as much public money per capita as any country in the world, and then we add roughly the same amount in private funding. This is not a private healthcare system. We medicalize a lot of social problems, which leads to a dilemma. Medicalizing a social problem is a great short-term strategy because people are willing to put money into it. Adding a little to that $5 trillion is not usually off-putting. It's a very bad long-term strategy because we starve all the other sectors in order to fund medical care. So you want to solve problems of housing, and I'll talk in positive ways about this, or food insecurity, or a bunch of other things. You may well want to do it in partnership with medical care and the medical profession, but it does come at a cost because it may be other organizations in other ways that are more effective and less expensive to accomplish the same goal. Ego is good, but a little more humility would be better for all of us in the way we engage our profession. I spend a lot of time working on policy problems where it's easy to point a finger outside of healthcare and say, oh, it's the lawyers or the bureaucrats, or maybe tangential to the way we think about the professional side of healthcare, the pharmaceutical industry, or something like that. And we need to look inwardly a lot of the time, and we are not very good at doing that. Most of the time that we're pointing outside, we really should be considering what we could do better ourselves. And then we have the new stuff, and the new stuff is scary. And every time we confront a challenge to science, a challenge to compassion, a challenge to even any notion of community. By the way, of course, I was very happy to see Obamacare enacted, but I always had a criticism of Obamacare, which was the ACA never, ever got closer to social solidarity than consumerism. The best it ever managed was to say, okay, everybody will get a better deal on sharing health insurance if this is enacted. There was absolutely no sense of in this togetherness. And you now see that type of fracturing across so many social issues. I won't try to go through this pretty long list, but the point being that, yeah, some of the challenges to medical professionalism in the healthcare system are longstanding. Some of them are actually new or revised in ways that I find morally distressing. There are some, I think, important lessons, though, for the medical profession in standing up for the social contract of medicine and actually, saying that it believes something and that society is better off if these things, continue to be paid. One is, it's tempting to say, oh, that state legislature was awful, or that judge was awful, or that prosecutor who prosecuted a nurse was awful. Don't. We depend on the core institutions of civil society, and I do not think it's doing us any good to discredit them. There are too many people who would like chaos or other forms of control, who would like to discredit those institutions. We need to defend them and improve them, but I think it's important to resist the temptation to just say, oh, they're all practicing medicine without a license, which itself, second point, is an absurd statement. We have the professional privileges we have because of those institutions of civil society, because they empower and authorize and trust us to do the things that we do. And we have to remember that these are privileges and not rights, which puts us in a difficult situation because we need to have the moral courage to tell the truth as we see it, to do the things that we think are important. And yet a consequence of doing that may be that someone removes some of the publicly conferred privilege that we enjoy. And that is a delicate dance, and I don't have a perfect solution to it. What I can say, and I will leave the rest of the talk really for, having flagged that I will leave the details for a different time or your future reading. This is an interesting opportunity to work together with lawyers. And, the relationship with doctors and lawyers, has a long and sometimes amusing and sometimes terrifying history, and I have lived it personally, but I would like to kind of leave you with something that is, I don't know if it exists at U Chicago. It certainly exists all over Chicago. I know it exists at Northwestern, which is the notion of medical legal partnership. And there are small versions of medical legal partnership. There are also much more ambitious versions of medical legal partnership, and people are working on those as we speak, including work that we're doing in Texas and elsewhere. And the notion of medical legal partnerships, and there's some slides, and I'm happy to give you the slides after the lecture. There are the basic notion of medical legal partnership is in integrated settings, often training settings, doctors and lawyers and social workers and other professionals working together to identify and address what we can call patient health harming legal issues. There's an acronym called IHEalth, meaning income and insurance, housing, education and employment, legal status of various sorts, and all sorts of personal legal needs. When these partnerships first began to form in the 1970s on the East Coast, in Boston, the original notion was that doctors' clinical expertise and professional authority would help lawyers get what their clients needed in terms of healthier housing or income support benefits or something of the sort. What has been the happy lesson of medical legal partnership is that the education also runs from law to medicine, because lawyers are very good at understanding and maneuvering the levers of social change. And that is, I think, kind of the where to leave you point on advocacy in this setting. That these models, if you have the opportunity, can actually span from patients to policy and can help lawyers do their jobs better. Actually, major organizations see medical legal partnership as the best way to narrow the justice gap in American society, not just the health gap in American society, but it can also help get medical professionals, health professionals out of their comfort zones and not advocating just for things that they can imagine, like free care and health coverage, but for things that are at least as important, like climate change and reducing mass incarceration and reducing income inequality and things of that sort that have never been central to how professional medical ethics sees itself, but as Don Berwick has written, are in fact the moral determinants of health. So let me end there and happy to take questions.